I'm from Guatemala. I'm 24 years old, and today I talk about my NGO is Jóvenes Artistas por la Justicia Social, Youth Artists for the Social Justice. And in this moment, I share one slide for talk about more about this NGO. Let me a second, please. Can you see my screen? Okay, that's great. Well, this is Jóvenes Artistas por la Justicia Social. This is a NGO in Guatemala, but we start like a, a group of the volunteers in Guatemala because we want to change Guatemala, but we just a friend. We have the idea for make a different project, but we just say one day, why we don't create a NGO in Guatemala, because all NGO are leader for adult person, but we want create a NGO leader for the youth person. Then we create that. This is a little bit story about the NGO. Hacks began in 2018 through Palladium Hub. Palladium Hub is a project of the USA promoting art as an advocacy tool. HEP played a technical and administrative support role because they have different webinars and workshop about the different things for how to create a project as a build capacities in young leaders so that they could influence and direct the network of the volunteers. This is how in 2022, HACS was legally registered as a non-governmental NGO and continues its work through the leadership of the board of the directors made up of young people. But in Guatemala, it's so difficult to register NGO because have a lot of different list of you check for the register the NGO, but we have different opportunities to present the documents um, in the different in the officer, but in the 2022, after 2 or 3 opportunities, we register a NGO. Then I would like to share the objective this NGO of the youth, create a space for the comprehensive training and develop of young people for engage in the various public interested topics, including the promotion of the rights and responsibilities, civics and cultural diversity. In these ways, reflect this strong art within their communities, becoming leaders and innovation in the country. But the most important thing is the use the art for impact in the youth people in different topics like responsibility, civics, and culture knows. Then this is Maria. He is a volunteer of the hacks, and this is her picture. It's beautiful if you see our philosophy or want to do. Each young person is artist inside. Since they transmit message, opinions, and demands through artistic expression. This can be through singing, dancing, painting, or drawing, or from leadership, TikTok, creating projects, and more. In this moment, we can impact in different people around the world using TikTok, using reels of the Instagram or wherever platform in social, because the internet create amazing a space like this. Then it's so important recognize the different abilities for create TikTok with the important message for share around the world. And this is a favorite phrase. We are all in an artist. And then, why art? Art is a channel of the communication between individuals within a society, as well as form of the protest. There are form hacks priorities. This friendly communication way to influence our environment. We use the art to empower youth and create safe space like workshop for young people and decision markers for dialogue and to exchange opinions and ideas about the current young situation in Guatemala and how to change that reality. Purpose. We have a lot of different purposes, but this is ones promote activist citizenship and the participation of young people in action, IMN, and the economic, social, political, law, and cultural development of Guatemala. Promote the talent of young people for the well-being and development of Guatemala. Promote access to education for young people through scholarships, training, diplomas, and training space. Promote mutual understanding of diverse youth. Be a safe space for the youth. Promote artist activities that contribute the prevention of the violence, vices, and other practices that harm the population and youth. Promote social justice activities to improve living conditions, health, education, violence prevention, decent employment, and irregular migration. Then I have one. I don't have more time. This is example. Oh, this is a song in Spanish, but talk about the situation, the difficult situation in Guatemala. I share the link on the chat if you want to hear.
Yes, please, Kimberly. You can also share. I'm going to put your email here if they want to also contact you.
Thank you so much. So beautiful, so inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pritin.
It's really nice what you're doing.
So the first story starts when I woke up one morning. It was April 2020, as COVID had just started. I was actually waking up at a house that was not my own. My house was under a building, had to stop all building work for it. I had to take the grace of somebody locally, somebody's house I didn't know, to go and stay with, and felt myself very alone, felt very distant from people and community. I'm a single mum. I live by myself with the kids half the time. And obviously COVID had really shown starkly to all of us, and to myself, it had shown me how much we prioritize one family structure, the family structure of the household, of the parents with the children. And it taken away a lot of the support mechanisms that I usually had, the ways that I sort of survived and connected in community. And it really showed me that the work that I do out in the world really doesn't stop when you get to your front door. It comes into your front door. It's not just out there, it also comes into who we are and how we live. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later to where we are now, I've really spent a lot of time working on those personal relationships. I have a lot of friends and family and colleagues, but actually I put in place and really invited people in to be what I now call my mycelium network. So not just have some loose friendships, I've really asked for commitments from a number of my friends, invited them to come in and be part of a deeper group. And what that entails is some of them now are on my next of kin. I have a tricky relationship with my parents. So therefore the default, if you don't have a partner, if you're not in a traditional mechanism, you kind of default back to your parents, and that wasn't working for me. So now some of my friends do. They also have a WhatsApp group. So if something happened, if I was in hospital, I could actually text that WhatsApp group and say, I need help, I need you to be there, I need to help look after my kids. So I've put in place the actual mycelium network and changed things. And most importantly, this is a systems change for me at the very micro level. but it really has supported the change in my psyche, the way that I think about myself, the security and stability that I feel in the world. And so the reason why I shared this story as the starter is I work in systems change, and I've done so for over 2 decades, that we often think about systems change as this outcome, the change in the world. But actually, it's about reconfigurating the relationship we have at these multiple levels. Yes, at the structural level, but really in the space as change makers and how we contribute to the way that we organize and what we now call how do we constellate for change, but also at these micro levels, at the level of team, at the level of community, and yes, at the level of your personal life, and also at the level of our changing the structure of our psychology, the repatterning of our relationship with ourselves and how we relate to people. So these are the little stories. I've got a couple more stories to tell you. I decided not to tell one big story because I think the work of this is actually about all these tiny little stories that make up the bigger change, that really show the different relationships. So I worked in education systems change for about 10 years, and we had a lot of successes. We changed the curriculum, we changed in the UK, we looked at changed the way the schools were inspected, teacher training, great successes. And then a new government came along and almost slashed and burned a lot of those progresses. But we'd spent 7 years building up 56 communities of practice, building up the leadership, the relationships, the capacity to run local projects, to change whole schools, to think about how things are doing. And I left that work about 10 years ago directly. But because of the knitting and the weaving of those relationships, when I go back or when I bump into some of those people in different settings, what they say is the work didn't really stop. So though we thought we hadn't changed the policy and that had changed, they were still doing the policy. They said, we still meet with our community of practice, we still connect with them, we still have those relationships, we're still sustained. So often when we get funding for maybe, we had a lovely 4 or 5 years funding for this community of practice, but it stopped. But actually the relationships remained, and a lot of that energy and agency and connection kept on going. And this is 10 years after I was working in this space. I still hear of these stories of how that capacity and work still continues because of those relationships. I want to zoom to another level. So I worked on a collaborative project with about 9 different organizations in the marine sector, a systems change project. And we invested a lot of time just being together. We used to go to the seaside together, right? So we used to go to the sea. We love the sea, so we're working on marine issues. And that sounds all great, and it felt like really luxurious. And the funder did actually pay for us. We were very lucky. But what it did mean is when we hit tricky times 3 or 4 years in, we had a really tricky time of having to renegotiate budgets with each other between who got what in the collaboration. It didn't feel as hard. It felt difficult, but we didn't break the relationship. We kept on working together. Some people got more money, some people got less money. And because of the time we had spent sharing our love of the sea, going swimming together, we were still working when we went away together, but just having that extra time, it meant when we hit the trickiness, when we hit those times, we had to hit issues of COVID and had to totally change our plastic project because nobody wanted to use fountains anymore. All these things that could mean we ended, we didn't. And then when we did need to end, we were able to end because we'd created the relational energy to keep that going. And I feel close to some of those colleagues in that collaboration I did sometimes with my own organizational colleagues. So I also want to zoom down one more level, and that level is to the team and organization. And I can't share all the stories. These are too painful sometimes. The power dynamics, the different values, I've got lots of stories there about how when you work in your own team, it can feel almost more painful. It can feel almost more at that level of how do you work with people like that. The one little story I'll tell you is when the School of Systems Change, which I run, was part of Forum for the Future, still connected, but we wanted to change the nature of our relationship, become much more of a sister organization. And there was real conflicts, and my CEO at the time and myself actually decided to sit down. It was a lovely sunny day in South London, and we sat on the common together, had a glass of wine, and we had a heart-to-heart conversation. It was really felt very tense and conflictual, but we really just shared honestly where we were and what was happening. And it suddenly dropped. And we were almost ready to just give up. Both of us almost ready to leave both organizations. We're almost ready to go no. And because we could just share and be totally honest of what we really wanted and what it really meant, and that we were willing to walk away, but we also willing to step forward, it almost just enabled to unlock, and it unlocked everything to have a flow of relationship, to allow things to shift, to really reconfigure that relationship. So don't underestimate how much these reconfiguring relationships happened almost in that nanosecond of that moment. I know it was a massive energy shift on that sunny day. But this is the work of systems change. This is the work of living the change of flowing together, putting the mycelium roots down at the personal level, at the organizational team level, really attending to those relationships, and then doing it in collaborations, doing it in initiatives and projects, all the way out to these bigger systems change projects when you're working across multiple sectors like I did in the education system. So those are my micro stories about the levels and places of reconfiguring relationships. So I hope you don't mind me just not sharing one, but sharing a few, because I think that's part of it. I wanted to demonstrate that this work isn't just done at one level, it's done at many. So thank you for choosing to listen to me today. And lovely to meet you all, and love to hear all your voices, but that's not what this is about right now. Thank you.
It's gone really fast, and the major thread for me has been the journey I've been on over time, and with this passion for trying to understand better how social change happens. And just like change, what I keep learning is changing. So my first career out of college was in advertising, and I like to say that's where I learned the craft and the art of narrative change, cut my teeth on narrative change, something that many of us focus on today. My second career was in business strategy consulting, and I focused on growth strategies with companies, and we spent a lot of time helping companies move from thinking about sort of their internal environment to their external environment, and to borrow a hockey metaphor, to help them skate to where the puck will be as opposed to where it is. And my career over the last 24 years has been in the social sector, really studying and practicing the work of social change. And I've had three major evolutions in my understanding of social change over that time. Chronologically, it's been individual to collective, program to system, and rational to relational. So I want to say a little bit about each. Moving from an individual perspective on social change to a collective perspective was the result of my first 7 years working in the sector and working one-on-one with foundations, nonprofits, government, and business at a consulting firm called FSG. And we were primarily working on on strategic planning around social issues, social and environmental issues. And after 7 years of working with individual organizations, my colleagues and I had this epiphany. Most of the organizations were doing great work, and pretty much all of them had these lofty visions of missions of things like ending climate change and reducing citywide achievement gaps and ensuring improved access to healthcare for isolated seniors. All incredible, worthy missions, but missions that could not be accomplished on their own. So the question was, why weren't people collaborating with others more? And what we learned when we spoke with folks was that they didn't think collaboration could work. To say it another way, I don't know if this metaphor that I like will mean anything to you, but they didn't feel the juice was going to be worth the squeeze to collaborate. So we did research, we midwifed a body of work called Collective Impact, which is about the 5 conditions for achieving large-scale change for working together with others. Now, after writing that initial article around collective impact, we began to work with communities and collaborations across sector. And it was in working with these groups that sort of the axiom that we applied was, if you want to change the system, get the system in the room. And by that, I mean you get a pluralistic representation of the system. But I noticed that often when we got the system in the room to work on systems change strategies, what came back were programmatic strategies. And I realized after sort of going through that a number of times was that in part that was because people didn't have a sense of what a system was or what systems change was about. So we developed a framework, which we simply named the 6 conditions of systems change, where we looked at what conditions at a structural level, a relational level, and what we call the transformative level, which is about shifting mental models. So my last transition, the journey that I'm currently on, is to move from a rational understanding of social change to a relational one. This, I think, is hard for many of us who grew up in the mainstream colonized culture to wrap our minds around. But I believe it's easily the most profound when we think about social change and systems change, and important. We're deeply engaging in the relational side of change is what is going to allow us as individuals, as human beings, as communities to transform. And without that deep engagement on the relational side, we're going to remain stuck. Now, there's so much that I could say about the importance of the relational and viewing social change through a relational lens versus a rational lens. But for now, I will leave you with my present understanding of what's at the center of social change and systems change. I think it's quite simple, and I believe most of us already know this. For some of us, we just need to remember it. It's about relationships, connectivity, energy, momentum, and intimacy. And importantly, these are not elements that can be understood solely through the head. They are best understood through the heart and through the body. They are spiritual, and they all are synonyms for love. Thanks for listening. And gosh, by my clock, we have 46 seconds left. Usually I go over, so I was like really wanting to make sure I didn't go over with all of you. So I achieved that objective at any rate. But thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing, John. And it was actually a very intimate thing having to listen to you speaking with my eyes closed. I don't know if anyone else actually did that, but I really appreciated the depth that you shared with us today and how it all revolves around love. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Beverly. That's yeah, it's wonderful to sort of use different senses, right? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Moses, and my story is a story of an insult from a British Prime Minister that later on turned to be a Pan-African movement. So a couple of years ago, during the tenure of the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, he came and was meeting African leaders, and he said Africa was the remaining blemish or wound on the human conscience. So while the African leaders perhaps did not take that seriously, they continued to wine and dine. Many of us felt that, look, this cannot be, that Africa is considered to be the remaining blemish on the conscience of humanity. And at the same time, the romantic economists, many of them trained in Harvard and others trained in the London School of Economics, could actually continue to tell us that Africa is rising. But as we went out into communities, we actually found the reverse, that the social indicators of people continue to be depressingly poor. So it's not about the continent. It's not about Africa rising. It should be about Africans rising. And that gave birth to a Pan-African movement called Africans Rising for Peace, Justice, and Dignity. So the idea really was a direct contestation of what Tony Blair had said and what the economists were saying, that Africa is rising. And we say it's not about Africa is rising, it should be about Africans rising. And at the time also, and before the birth really, was also a time of a number of INGOs, the do-gooders. Many of them are based in the North. They would actually, they were also having their own difficult conversations of what is their new role as movements are coming up, as NGOs are coming up. And they only have three options as an international NGO. You're either going to transform, you're either going to die well or die badly. Many of them took the decision to transform. But as they were transforming, we took the decision that we needed to form a Pan-African movement, and this would be Africans Rising. This would be a movement which would be the first responder, whether it was a flood, whether they are locusts, whether it is a famine, whether it's refugees that have arrived, that the first responders really would be Africans for Africans, and not waiting for somebody from Europe, not waiting for somebody from America. That will be there, we will be each other's brother's keeper. As the scriptures say, you are your brother's keeper. And so this was a movement that would be there. And if there's going to be any other support, it would be coming from outside, it would be coming later on. So this is a movement, a Pan-African movement that was born in Tanzania on the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. And for us, this was quite very symbolic. Mount Kilimanjaro is the roof of Africa, being the highest mountain of Africa, and having this Pan-African movement being midwifed on the foothills of the roof of Africa was symbolic that we are actually wanting to make sure that Africans are rising up in their social indicators. Africans are able to support each other, and no longer will Africans have to rely on handouts from missionaries, handout from INGOs, that if there is any crisis, the first person who will be there will be an African to be able to respond to an African. And that's the story of Africans rising. What was actually an insult is now transformed into a Pan-African movement, serving all the 54 countries of Africa and serving all Africans from the diaspora. Thank you.
The director of evaluation, and I had no evaluation experience whatsoever. I just been in the nonprofit sector a while, and even though the job was not exactly something I was prepared to do, there was something like physically drawing me to this work. And I joined Playworks. On my first day there, I went out to a playground in Oakland, California that had not had any support for the play that was happening. And I walked out on the playground just to see what it was like. And what I saw was a large group of kids standing around the sides of the playground, not doing anything. And there was a small group of kids in the center that were playing a game of chase that didn't feel safe. It looked like things were going to go awry. And I asked the person who helped me to the playground, and he brought me there because it was a school that Playworks was about to start helping. And he wanted me to see it. And I said, "What is happening?" And he said, "Well, the adults here are not, kids don't know what to do. They're trying to stay safe. And there are some kids trying to play, but it isn't really feeling all that inclusive. So this is what we are going to do something about." And I went home that night and thought, oh, this is not okay. This is really not okay for kids. So that was 20 years ago. I've been working with Playworks all that time. And what we do is create the conditions for kids to play. It's free play, it's on their own. But we also model the ways to build relationships and be kind and offer joy. And those are really simple things, like we use rock, paper, scissors. You may call that game something else in where you live, to resolve the disagreements of whether the ball is in or out. And it turns out kids will use that arbitrary game because they want to keep playing. That's their whole motivation. And so we do things like that. We give high fives a lot. We just create the conditions for everyone to get to play. And that is recreating for me the magic I felt as a child, and my kids I observed in them. And it feels so good to be helping kids make friendships, meet other kids, feel included. So in recent years, we realized that we can't make this this magic happen beyond we're hoping about 1,000 schools in the US and a little more, and that's about 700,000 kids. But in the US, there are 30 million children in elementary schools, and we realize we can't do it by ourselves. So we're building a network, and that network is with other organizations that support kids in schools or out of schools. So think of out of school, after school organizations or other organizations in the community that are part of schools who share these values too. All of us who support kids as a career want every kid to get to play. So we're forming a network with these organizations, and we're sharing what we know how to do. Our superpower is how to create a playground that feels good and everyone is playing. And we're sharing it with these other organizations so they can do that in their own communities. And what we're finding is that these other organizations like the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Clubs or Campfire, they have their own reasons to want to support play in schools, their own values, their own aspirations for the kids in their community. And it's okay if those aspirations are different than ours. They don't have to be the same. We just share a value of making sure that play is inclusive, feels good, and that every kid gets that opportunity. So finding folks in these organizations who have different aims and shared values is such an energizing experience. So I feel like now I'm part of a larger community, and being in relationship with those folks and in that community is powerful. So thanks. 19 seconds, I did it. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for the encouragement. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Welcome. Enjoy the next one.
So I'm Sharath. It's great to be here. I'm just going to give a little bit of a comedic account of my my own journey with networks. So that's okay. It's afternoon, and in the UK, some lightness might be helpful as well. And there's that famous proverb that it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And that's why I try to be friends with all the social influencers and anyone, of course, who works at TikTok. But on a serious note, I think we often underestimate.
Sharath, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you please talk a little bit more slowly? English is not my first language, and I'm doing my best, but I'm finding
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for that. I will for sure. So, I think one thing we can try to do is think about all the people in our social network. Our old bosses, for example, our old friends, our past classmates, former lovers, all of these people, with a view of, we often have a lot of social capital there, a lot of relationships that we can try to unlock. My first funder when I set up a nonprofit organization was a former colleague. My first client in my current life, I'm a leadership advisor, was a former business school classmate. Let's not talk about lovers and so on. But I think what's really fun when we're with those people is we can remind them of all the embarrassing moments that happened in our past lives, right? And we can remind them of all the photos we have of those moments. We can sort of scare them by telling them that we have a toddler in the house who's got unlimited access to our TikTok account on our phones, and all the journalists who follow our TikTok account as well. So I think just the key thing I'd say on this sort of idea that we often have a lot of network capital that we don't always reach out to, particularly people who've been through significant experiences with us in work or in life more broadly. And of course, if there's someone out there who you knew from your past life and he or she was quieter, you can Photoshop them, you can show them with lots of people and use AI to paint some powerful realities as well. The second thing I think just on this idea of networks has been the value of being very intentional. And often I think I used to try to be the smartest person in a conversation. I realized how so stupid that really was. And I think there's often we still go for this idea of the small differences, right? We listen to someone, we're sort of half listening at the same time we're thinking, I do a lot of this stuff, I just do it a bit better. I think it's actually really important to just focus on what's unique about their approach, what's different, what can we take away and learn from it. That means we can gossip better, of course, but also it's also just a great chance to steal ideas from lots of people as well at the same time. But on a serious note, though, again, there's so much we can learn by just being generous in listening. That's been a really powerful lesson I've taken away. I did some research in my LinkedIn network recently, and I reckon that for every conversation or introduction I've made, I could have probably made about 7, right? So there's just huge things I could have done if I was just more intentional. And you talk to all these big VCs in Silicon Valley. A lot of what they do, they fund actually very few companies in the end, right? But they meet hundreds of people a year. They kind of make lots of network connections. They're Malcolm Gladwell, the writer, calls them mavens. These kind of people have a lot of social connectivity. I think the word maven sounds a bit too much like a pigeon, but maybe you can be the godfather or the godmother of your social network, the Sicily style as well. And what's great with that is you can bombard everyone with introductions while you get on with the real work at the same time. So just the other thing I'd say that is also been a useful sort of insight for me on networks has been the role of being detached. I see gurus in the audience here, but I was born as a Hindu, and that sort of means that I believe in suffering. And Hindu philosophy basically says that you should try to detach yourself from the outcome of an action. You do the action, and then you let go of what actually happens as a result. And that's probably a good principle for networks. You don't know what's going to happen when you introduce two different people together. They could become lifelong business partners. They could absolutely hate each other. They could have a baby together, for example. And the key is to detach, but if it goes exceptionally well, make sure you get a piece of the action. So if they set up a profitable business, make sure you keep 5% of the lifetime royalties. If they hate each other, just try to avoid or get 0% of the hate mail. And if there are kids involved, just try to get 0% of any nappies through the process as well. And I'm trying to lobby LinkedIn for some kind of app that will have a lifetime link into any introduction I make and what happened to those people as well. Only kidding. Other thing I think just on networks is being really responsive and quick. It's a bit like an Uber driver, an Uber Eats driver, sorry. And I think intros are better when they're piping hot, not when you're waiting to see when the driver will arrive. So being prompt with those can be really helpful. And just one of the last things I'd say on this is that some of you might read a great book by Adam Grant, the psychologist. It's called Give and Take. And he really tries to dismantle this idea of the kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours culture. So he finds that actually the people who do better in the long term are those who actually are very generous, don't think about the reward for making an introduction. Though there is an irony there, the people who benefit the most in the short term, he calls them takers, do pretty well. They exploit a lot of these things. And nowadays with the world it is, we can be these kind of digital nomads that keep moving around and taking advantage of that. The other so useful sort of step-by-step set of thoughts around networks. And there's always that famous phrase that if a great manager thinks about what they should do, and a great leader thinks about who should they speak to around that. If you have the answer, of course, it's better to be a manager. But overall, I think it's such a powerful thing as a leader. And unlike money or funding, unlike sort of great people, networks are a positive sum, not zero sum. I.e., you can keep. There's no scarcity. There's no fixed amount. There can always be more. All of us can benefit. So if you crack that, you can write a book called something like the End of Zero Sum, and you can have a great network around to buy the book at the same time. So I hope those musings were helpful around the role of networks, at least in my leadership journey. But I hope those principles also around trust, letting go, and intentionality are some things to take away as well. So happy networking, everyone, and I'll see you back in the plenary. Again, please stay in touch as well.